So, welcome to Conversations in Disaster Robotics podcast. I'm Dr. Robin Murphy, Director of the Center for Robot-Assisted Search and Rescue at Texas A&M Engineering Experiment Station. And today the conversation is with David Merrick, who is Director for the Center for Disaster Risk Policy at Florida State University and the Deputy Director of the Emergency Management and Homeland Security Program there. David, thanks for conversing online with us. Tell me about your work with unmanned aerial systems for disasters. I mean, you teach a course on UAS, you deploy UAS. What don't you do with UAS?
I don't sleep enough. That's probably the biggest problem. Yes, we've been working with UAS specifically in emergency management, and really kind of looking at like all phases of emergency management for about 3 years. It all really started out of a project we were working in the southern part of Haiti, which actually just got hammered very, very badly by Matthew, doing some community preparedness training and outreach type efforts in which we were using a bunch of grad students to work with these communities. And part of the request of that was, we don't have any maps. We haven't had any maps since the 60s was the last time we did all this. And we don't really know where people are, and we don't know where surge will come and all these things. And very long story short, we decided we would just go out and do that. How hard could it be? Turned out to be a lot harder than I thought it was going to be. But we did get that done. We did some mapping. We're able to apply some existing surge models to the contours that we got from the UAS. Very successful overall. And started trying to think about other ways we could put this to use domestically and internationally. And that kind of led to students asking, hey, this is great. You talk about this all the time. When are you going to start teaching us how to do it? One thing led to another, and now we're teaching classes. And we do real-world work with UAS everywhere that they'll let us. We drag students along as much as possible because I'm a firm believer in getting students experience before they graduate. It's good for them, it's good for us, everything. So I guess at this point we're a bit of a hodgepodge of everything UAS related when it comes to emergency management and disasters.
Very cool, very cool. So what have you learned from all of these experiences? And in particular, did Hurricane Matthew present any new issues that you hadn't seen before?
Well, the first thing we learned going way back, all of 3 years ago, is have three of everything, because the first two are going to break. And we knew this. We've got a lot of experience in emergency management not related to UAS, so that wasn't necessarily a big surprise for us. But yes, everything's going to break on you at some point. And we've had days where we literally sat around and said, there's our tech guy and myself with the equivalent of chewing gum and baling wire trying to put everything back together when it just quit working for no apparent reason. Matthew provided a bunch of challenges that we didn't expect. First of all, we didn't really get to do much here in Florida because thankfully Matthew stayed far enough offshore that the impacts we felt here were relatively minor compared to what we're seeing in other states. But it did illustrate a bunch of regulatory issues that are coming about, or maybe we should call them coordination issues, between the local governments, the operators, state government, and the FAA at the federal level. We've practiced two years now in the statewide hurricane exercise with the FAA, with their special operations folks, in the air operations branch here in Tallahassee. And we thought we had a pretty good grasp of what the process was going to be regarding emergency COAs and other type of coordination stuff. And then on Friday, while Matthew was making landfall, and I have a team, I'm with our team that's deployed with a state USAR team. We're waiting for the wind to die down. While that's happening, we're figuring out that the FAA has changed the rules on us, and they're going to do things completely differently. And taken aback doesn't begin to really describe that. So we were kind of scrambling to try to figure out what the rules were going to be, not only for us, but for all the other folks that I was trying to coordinate with that wanted to operate, including private sector that wanted to fly for utilities, and a variety of things like that. So that was our big challenge.
We saw that too, David. We're sitting over here and I prepared a list of sort of a how-to list for the emergency managers of if the group is flying with you as a 107, if they have a 333, if they have a COA, if they work for you and they own their own drone. What can they do? Kind of work through that. And then the FAA memo came through, and we're still kind of confused by it. So
I'm not sure where it came from, frankly. So,
well, it came from the FAA, as all
right. Yeah, but what part of it? No one's taking credit for it.
Exactly. So, is regulation the number one barrier to the adoption of small UAS in emergency management?
If you had asked me that a year ago, I would have said yes. It was a huge problem for local entities in particular, and a lot of our research and work historically at CDRP has been with the local jurisdictions. So yeah, I would say a year ago when we were still looking at 333 was the only way to fly commercially, and public COAs were not, they weren't issuing blanket COAs. It was, specific airspace for a specific airframe. Regulation was definitely a big barrier. It has gotten a lot easier, and I thought that it was a sunny sky type situation about 2 weeks ago, and now I'm starting to be post Matthew a little confused again, frankly. On paper, regulations have gotten a lot easier. I think that really the biggest barrier is insurance and liability, which does tie together to that regulation. When I'm talking to local jurisdictions now, instead of telling them to, go get a pilot's license and look at getting a 333 or a blanket COA or a public entity COA, now I'm telling them, well, you need to go talk to your risk manager first, and see what they're going to want to do, and find the county attorney or the city attorney, and someone's going to have to educate those folks on what the realities are, and go from there. And the first rule of thumb I tell folks is to limit that liability from a public perspective. Just make sure that you're following whatever the FAA tells you you're supposed to be doing, because that's going to be the first thing that's questioned when something goes wrong. And it's not a matter of if something goes wrong; it's a matter of when something goes wrong. So that's probably the largest barrier. I think we also see a lot of questions about, well, how do we know who's qualified, who's not qualified? What do we need to do? What training is available specific to emergency services or emergency management and UAS? So those things are all relatively easy to address. It's the regulatory side and that liability side that I think is going to be interesting for a few years to come.
Well, we're out of time here, but very quickly, what's your advice to emergency managers about small unmanned aerial systems? Thumbs up, thumbs down, or wait? Thumbs up,
100%. If nothing else, start training, start playing, start seeing what you can do. The use cases are still being defined. There's absolutely no reason. Cost is not a barrier. We won't talk about that at all because it's relatively low. There's absolutely no reason not to give it a thumbs up. Go out and start seeing what you can put together, and then get the attorneys and the liability folks online.
Great. Well, thank you, David, for spending time with us today. And you can check out more about David's work and more about the Center for Robot Assisted Search and Rescue.